الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم جزاكم الله khairan for joining us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of our fast, accept all of our dua. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of our sadaqah, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for all of our shortcomings. We begin a new juz, a new surah within that juz. Also, we stopped at the ending of last juz and we even missed a little bit, but inshallah we'll keep going just so we don't fall behind. In this juz, we'll start from the beginning of Surah An-Nisa, and it goes on and we'll go on to the end of the fifth juz. So in Surah An-Nisa, it deals with mainly a lot of social aspects of how we deal with one another, and it just goes and lists a whole bunch of it, and it gives also examples of nations in the past of where they went wrong and how we should avoid and be cautious so we don't fall into the same problems. Now, when the story begins, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just talk to the believers, but He calls all of mankind, reminding us that, listen, you're just from one man and one female. One male, one female, they're the start of everything. So there's no reason for you to create any kind of social problems. And unfortunately, as human beings, we've created many social injustices throughout time, whether it's racism, nationalism, people because of their status and influence and money. We create always problems and barriers between one another, where one group thinks they're better than the other. And this creates a lot of problems within society, and it deteriorates it. Instead of progressing, we start to digress. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls all of mankind and lets them know that, listen, all of you, I'm calling you towards the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's raqiba over all of you. And Raqib is like a watcher over us. Now, when we think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala watching over us, we shouldn't be thinking like, oh no, He's watching over me, I gotta be careful. But more, it's not like you're looking at a red light if there's a cop, or you're going kind of fast, you look this way, that way for a cop. Not that type of watching over, but more of a type of watching over where there's a little child or a little baby that's walking, or even a boy or a girl that's walking, they're very young, and the parents are watching over, making sure that they don't fall or hurt themselves in any way. So this is all with love, not with kind of anger or anything like that, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching over us. Now, before we even get to all the other social aspects with family and all other things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first starts talking about people who don't even have a family, that they have a right upon us. And over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the orphans. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, him being an orphan as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that before we even get into family, that do not forget about these people who don't have one. They're a test for us. If we have a family and there's an orphan, the orphan is a test for us. So we have to make sure we take care of them, we don't oppress them. And even in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that certain people, they will take the orphan and use him for his money and waste it. All of this is not allowed, and we have to be considerate and empathetic towards that child or towards that person who is an orphan, and take care of them. And when they get old enough, everything that's theirs, we give it to them. We don't keep anything for ourselves. There's a lot of rules and etiquettes with that we're not going to get into. Now, also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then speaks of family as well. It goes to marriage, starts from marriage, and it keeps going that with the relatives as well, that both the husband and wife, they have rights on another. And even the relatives, sometimes we just sort of step back. I mean, a lot of relatives are involved great deal during the time of the wedding. They want to make everything go the way they want. But then when it comes to actually supporting the marriage the way they're supposed to, they fall short. Because the way they're supposed to is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, there's supposed to be someone that's decisive from her side. There's supposed to be someone that's decisive from his side. If they fear that they're going to break apart, then these two, let them help come to a solution, help them. And unfortunately, where we fall short is a lot of times in-laws usually just take the side of their own family. Instead of trying to figure out a solution, they just support the anger or the sadness or the grief that their own family member is going to, multiplying it instead of trying to put it down and making these two get back together. So there's a responsibility on all sides. The husband has responsibilities, the wife has the responsibilities, and even relatives who are outside of that marriage, but they're just related to both, they also have responsibilities. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes over that. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about inheritance as well within the family and how it's already set. We cannot write our own inheritance. what's written in the Quran and in the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's already set. So it's done. The only thing that we can do is if someone wants to make sure that it's given that way, because you can't really set it, you can write that inheritance the way it is according to Quran and Sunnah in your will. Especially if you live in the Western society where you want to make sure it gets split up that way, you write it in that way. And you don't write it that I want it to be distributed as the way the Quran says it. You write it exactly what the Quran says. You write that down, because that's the only way that you can ensure that it is done according to Quran and Sunnah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also talks about that after mentioning the family and the wife, that it goes back to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the solution to all of our problems. When we have every relationship through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we love our family through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we love our spouses through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our kids through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we'll always be thinking for their benefit, and never will they cause us to put us in a situation where we would get upset and retaliate against them. Because if we're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there's no reason for us to lash out. Whenever we give sadaqah for Allah, if the guy says thank you, or if the guy says it says some words of like spite or anger, it doesn't affect us, because we did it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So similarly, all of our love for all of our family and all those around us should be through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what will keep those bonds strong. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that do that, and then do good to your parents, do good to your relatives, do good to the close ones, the far ones, everyone around. First, you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now what happens is that one thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of is that sincerity. Sincerity is something that we try our best to get it, and we keep doing deeds, until we get to a level where it's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only. Now, we have to be careful, because over here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that there are certain people, they're stingy. They're stingy, and other people, they'll give, but they're giving it so that the people can see them. Ri'a an-nas. Now, when they're doing that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, why don't they just do it for believe in Allah and the akhirah, and just give that from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them? They're giving it anyway. But to do it for someone else besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just a waste. That's why we always try to give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously, the month of Ramadan is one of the best times to give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So really, it's a chance. We continue giving it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of different things that may come in between, different obstacles or different distractions. We focus on giving it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that sense, when we do that, no matter how much small of a deed it is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give to us, and we will not get oppressed. Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, to the weight of an atom, we're not going to get oppressed. No matter what you did, how small it was, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will get your full reward for it. The other thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions is our salah. Obviously, when we talk about worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the best way that we can worship Him is our salah. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about salah, this is one of the second time where the alcohol is mentioned, or the state of being drunk is mentioned, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not approach the salah while you're in the state of drunkenness. Now, this is the first level is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, we talked about, we didn't really talk about it, but it was in the beginning juz, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they're asking about alcohol, and they're asking about it, but there's a sin in it, and there's a benefit, and there's a sin, and the sin is greater. Now, this is the second ayah that was revealed about that when you come towards the salah, don't be in that state of drunkenness. And what it does is it's slowly removing habits from that society in stages. In another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the same juz that had we told them from the beginning to do certain deeds, very few would have done it. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did everything in stages. And that's why it took the 23 years for the Quran to be revealed, so everybody can adopt Islam in a way that they can slowly adapt to it. And that's a lot of wisdom in that for us, because the Quran is already done. The Quran is finished. There's no us doing it in stages in that way. But what we can do is, whenever we're talking about trying to come back into close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we always want to do it slowly in stages, things that we can do continuously, consistently. And as we do it, we add to it. We don't just jump one day and try to do something that we're not ready for, and then we never do it again. So now, the other thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about the salah later on in it is the Salat al-Khawf, which is what the Prophet ﷺ prayed when there was an instance that they all couldn't pray at the same time because they were in the middle of a battlefield. Now the Salat al-Khawf only applies to the Prophet ﷺ because nobody would want to be Imam when the Prophet ﷺ was there. In these times we don't need to pray Salat al-Khawf. You just have two different Jamaats, two different Imams. But when the Prophet ﷺ was given this Salat al-Khawf, this just shows the importance of Salah, that there's literally no reason except for a few excused reasons, like one when a women are in the menstruation cycle. Other than that, there's like no reason for somebody to miss their Salah. You're in state of fear, there's Salat al-Khawf for the Prophet ﷺ. You hurt your legs, you pray sitting down. You can't stand up, you sit down, you pray lying down. You can't even move, you pray with your eyes. Every single instant, there's some way for us to pray. And even there's no water, make wudu, make tayammum. There's always a way for us to make sure that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just shows the value and importance of Salah and how much we should be paying attention to it. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions in here, we always say, Sirat al-ladina an'amta alayhim. We say, an'amta alayhim, those who you favored upon. Over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that group. أولئك مع الذين أنعم الله عليهم من النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. The people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala favored are the prophets, the righteous, the truthful, and the martyrs. That these are the people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them with. So we go look at the stories of the prophets. We should read them and see what they were like, because that is the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Read about how to become the Siddiqeen. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a hadith says a person will continuously speak the truth until he's labeled, and according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the Siddiqeen. So to always speak the truth in that way, it's an easy way to be from the Siddiqeen. So there's all these different qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned of people making effort, people trying to become righteous, people always speaking truth, and the Prophets alayhi wasalam. We have to read about them so we know the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed and favored, and then we try to mimic them. And the other thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about is tadabbur fil Quran, to ponder over the Quran. We're about to play the Quran and we listen to it, it's beautiful when we listen to it, it's beautiful when we recite it, but we also want to ponder. We want to give some time to think and see, well, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying? And it says in the Quran, right in that ayah, that if you if you ponder about the Quran, then you would know that there's not that if it wasn't from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there'd be a lot of contradiction and a lot of conflictions. Now the problem is that we ourselves don't ponder over the Quran, so sometimes when somebody brings up a contradiction, we think that a contradiction may exist. But if we actually ponder, it will clear that. And pondering means thinking about it, a question arises, I don't know the answer, go to Imam, finding the answer, slowly getting and increasing our knowledge of everything around the Quran. That will remove the doubt that people bring to us, shaitan may bring to us, an individual may bring to us, about there being contradictions in the Quran. We'll be like, no, there's no contradiction. And that's the miracle, because if it was from someone besides Allah, there would be contradictions. So there's a lot more. And then the other thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions twice is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive any sin except for shirk, except for ascribing partners. In one state, he says, he attributes it to the people doing it, that they're committing a great lie when they do shirk. In another part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala connects it to the shaitan, that he himself is out to make people do shirk, to make people ascribe a partner to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's us just being careful that yes, our desires are constantly trying to play with us, and even though if we may not be doing shirk, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in a hadith that I don't fear that my ummah will start worshipping the sun or the rock or the moon or something like that, but they'll start having shirk al-khafi, which is a hidden shirk where they start doing actions for other people. And that's what we're talking about, sincerity as well. So we want to be cautious and aware that, okay, always renewing our intention, always making sure that we're doing things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then on the other side, knowing that there's this constant enemy that's there, that's coming after us, trying to make sure that we do shirk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not be grateful to Him. So shirk itself, why is it the only one that's not being forgiven? There's a lot of things behind it. One of the main things is that whenever somebody does a bad deed, it's a bad deed in itself. But shirk itself is a foundation to just do anything that's there. Because when you ascribe a partner to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then who's speaking on that partner's behalf? Like when people worshipped idols, who was speaking for that idol? It was some influential person, someone that took the position to say that this God is saying this. And when doing that, they're saying things on a whim. Now they've built a foundation to just make any deed permissible. And that's what happened in a lot of societies, and even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when they were worshipping idols, they just made everything that they wanted to be halal, halal. And all the things since the time of Ibrahim ﷺ, it morphed into something else. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for all of us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for all of our shortcomings. I'll start playing the Quran. It will be the 5th juz by Shaykh Al-Afasi. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.